Hello, my name is Jeffrey Toner. I am the current chairperson of the Doylestown Historical Society. Welcome to the Doylestown Historical Society's continuing video history interview series. I'm here today in Theater 1 of the Doylestown County Theater. This is the perfect location for today's interview of John David Toner. John was raised in Doylestown. He is the founding director of the nonprofit County Theater. Interviewing John today is Ron Strouse. Ron is the former mayor of Doylestown. So it is my pleasure and honor to introduce Ron Strouse and my brother, John David Toner.
Well, we're excited to be here today to talk with John Toner. And of course, John Toner is synonymous with the County Theater where we are today. But the story doesn't start there and it doesn't end there. And with that in mind, John, let's talk about your connection with Doylestown and how you came to Doylestown, if you could.
Sure. Family moved to Doylestown in 1955 when I was 3 years old. And we actually moved into the borough. My dad was an attorney, and he came to practice law here in Doylestown. And our first house was on North Street and Swamp Road, little house there. But I grew up in Doylestown, grew up primarily in the township out in Buttonwood Manor.
Right, right. And did you go to the Doylestown schools?
Yes, I did.
Central Bucks.
Central Bucks, Doylestown Township School,
Yeah.
Lenape Junior High, Unami Junior High, and Central Bucks High School. Of course, it was not West then.
It was not
That was
West.
the last year before East opened. So I take umbrage when people say, "Did you graduate from West?" No.
That's a good way of explaining that history too. So you became an attorney
Yes,
and practiced law here in Doylestown?
yes.
For how long?
Almost 20 years with my father in his firm. It was satisfying work, but not fulfilling work. And so when I transitioned out to do the county project, it was a really joyful experience for me.
So, respective of that period of time, when did your interest in films actually emerge?
Well, I guess I could say my initial interest in film was here at the County Theater and seeing Saturday matinees, seeing cowboy films and Three Stooges and Jerry Lewis. Really liked Jerry Lewis as a kid, I'm sorry to say. But my real film education came when I lived in New York in the mid-'70s, which was sort of the golden age of repertory film theaters. And that's where I was introduced to Fellini and Bergman and Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton, great Hollywood films. We would go to films 5-6 times a week.
Hollywood films and independent foreign films as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Although initially it probably was the foreign films, right, like Bergman and Truffaut and Godard, and that was, in the 70s they were the gods, right, rather than Hollywood films were déclassé.
So did you depend on the subtitles, or did you understand them in French?
My wife is a great language learner, but Miss Finkelstein did not think my French was very good in high school.
So, coinciding with that interest, you also have a collection that I understand of film posters,
yes,
historic film posters. Right. Did that happen to begin at the same time? Or?
No, it didn't. I was sort of interested in the vintage posters, but prior to the internet and eBay and things being available online, it was really hard to know what was available out there. Right. So I took some stabs at it, but never really collected. And it wasn't until about 2000 when eBay really was picking up steam that you could go online and see all the options that were out there, and that's when I started collecting.
And posters have been part of the film industry, I guess, since the 1890s or very
Sure.
early in the film industry.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right.
The number of film posters that were available in the golden period of Hollywood were much more varied than what we think of as a film poster today. What we think there's just one size really for a film poster today, which is called a one sheet. But they would have half sheets, 3 sheets, little lobby cards, publicity stills. And most of that advertising material was rented by the theater. It would come with the film, and you'd pay a rental fee for it. And then at the end of the run, which might only be 2 or 3 days for a film, you'd pack the film up and the posters and send them back to the distributor.
Which probably led to them becoming more valuable than they would otherwise be, I would think. I don't know.
Yeah, well, it was, actually that was, some of the depositories of the vintage films posters that we have now are from those distributors.
Oh.
A lot of them were thrown away, a lot of them were burned. It's like anything. Right. People don't really want them until 50 years later.
Right. So before the County Theater, there was what we know as closely watched films.
Right.
Can you tell us about how that began and how it became a precursor to the County Theater?
Yes, and first of all, let me officially say I never liked the name Closely Watched Films. It was named after a Czech film called Closely Watched Trains, which was way too much of an inside, reference. But it started in the fall of 1982 by 4 or 5 of us, depending, and it was to see films. You have to remember at that point it was before home movies were available. So the only place to see a film would be, on the Late Show on TV,
right.
Or if you went to New York, or we would go down to the TLA Repertory Theater down on South Street in Philadelphia a lot. We said, let's bring the films to Doylestown so we don't have to go to New York all the time or Philadelphia to see the films. And so we did that. We would show the films in 16 millimeter. Set up our projectors, set up the screen, set up folding chairs.
At the James Laura House.
Yep, initial 8 years at the James Laura House. We'd have a spring and fall series, 10 films each, and the last 2 years were at Lenape Middle School.
And how did people learn about those films?
Well, we had a newsletter that went around.
Okay.
Yeah, it's hard. How did we?
Yeah.
We sent them emails, Ron.
There was no social media
exactly.
to promote them.
No, so
but they were well attended.
So we advertised in the Intel and local papers. We had a hotline which you could call in and find out about, and we got a mailing list and talked to friends, and that slowly built by word of mouth.
Can you tell us first of all what was here historically before the County Theater?
The county was built in 1938, okay. But there was a theater on the county site before that, which was called the Strand Theater, which was built in 1926. And before the Strand, there were a number of Nickelodeons and small movie places. There was one in the Lenape building next door. There was one in the Boys Brigade building on Donaldson Street, which is called the Princess Theater. And those were all during like the late teens, early 20s as the movie industry was getting going. But the first real theater was the Strand. It was owned by the Oddfellows and run by a local businessman whose name was Joseph Wodak. And that operated, until 1938.
And after 1938, it became the county.
Right. And there's actually an interesting story of how the county came to be built. Joseph Wodak was running the Strand Theater, but the Oddfellows decided to sell the building, and they sold it to the William Goldman Theater Organization, which was a big
theater organization in Philadelphia.
That's correct.
Right.
And Wodak still had like a year and a half on his lease, but the writing was on the wall that after that was over, the Goldman Organization was going to take it over. Right. So he got in touch, Wodak, to a guy, Charles Kahn, who was a Philadelphia real estate guy and was involved in the ag school, Delaware Valley Agricultural School, on their board of directors. And lo and behold, 6 months later, it was announced that a new theater was going to open 2 blocks down State Street from the Strand on State and Clinton. And it was going to be called the County Theater, a competing second theater. Then 6 months later, the next article in the Intel is Charles Kahn and Wodak have bought the Strand from the Goldman organization and announced that they were going to build a new theater, the County Theater, on the site of the Strand. They started work in the middle of June 1938. The county opened on September 5th of 1938, less than 3 months later. So they raised a building, built a new theater, and it was a modern, up-to-date theater.
We don't build in that time frame these days.
Yeah.
And that was a theater that seated how many people?
About 700.
700 people in one theater.
Yes.
Contrary to what some people say, it did not have a balcony.
Correct.
And that theater was a vibrant business for a long, long time.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Its golden period and very popular period were the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Having grown up in town, you probably remember going there and having it be packed on a Friday or Saturday night, where you might come with friends and have to split up to find seats. I have great memories of coming to the theater when I was a kid for Saturday matinees. It was a quarter then. I think it was 50 cents for kids for regular shows, but the matinee was a quarter. Adults were 75 cents. I remember when they raised the price for adults to $1.25, my mother practically died. I said, "Can you believe $1.25 to go to the movies?" I remember one time in particular, my earliest distinct memory of being here was coming with some neighbors, the Sanders boys, and Pete Cabry to see Darby O'Gill and the Little People. And I must have been 7 or 8 years old at that point. And we had to split up. It was it was 700 seats. It was an evening show, and we had to split up. And so I sat with Pete down towards the front, and there's a banshee in Darby O'Gill, which was terrifying to a 7 or 8-year-old. And I closed my eyes and said to Pete, "Tell me when it's gone." A couple of beats. And he said, "It's gone." I opened my eyes. It was still there. And it was still there. He was laughing the whole time. It was a town center and very vibrant.
And then came some difficult times.
Yes.
And the change in the way and where people went to see movies. There were also a couple other theaters in town or nearby. One in Cross Keys called the Key Theater?
The Key Theater. I have vague memories of that, as you probably do too.
Yeah.
I think that only operated, I've done some research on that. I think it only operated as a movie theater for a couple of years.
I think that's right.
And then it was like a roller skating place, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, and I remember you hear about fights would happen at the Key.
It's now the location of Thompson Toyota.
Yeah, that's right.
Right,
That's right.
right.
The theater itself was run in the 50s and 60s, the County Theater, by Budco and Claude Schlanger, who was a local resident. And this was his first theater, and they built a regional theater chain.
Including the drive-in that was located south of town.
Drive-in was a Budco, and they had 20 or 25 different, mostly in the Philadelphia area, some along the East Coast. They eventually sold out to AMC.
So the county closed in what year? Do you know?
Well, it closed a number of times, actually.
Okay.
It closed a little bit after Budco got out, when Schlanger built the barn twin on South 611 outside of town. It was independently operated. It sort of opened for a while and closed. Then in the 80s, the Ferrugio family ran it pretty steadily for about 10 years, and then they closed. And then it had another operator. So it was a series, the 70s and 80s were a series of independent operators. And it looked like when in '92, when the most recent of those operators left, that it might not fly at all after that. And that's when John Rudolph, who was on the local revitalization committee, and probably more importantly, Judge Ed Ludwig, got together with us and said, hey, you guys run a film society. Why don't you take a shot at running the county theater?
Right.
And I said those famous words, which I said famous with me and my wife, of like, how hard could it be to run a movie theater? I can probably do it part-time while I'm practicing law.
And that was a very different environment in terms of downtown Doylestown back then. We had many fewer restaurants than we do today, and their focus was more on lunch, that their business focused on county employees and, the Bucks County government being here in the middle of town, but not much in terms of activity in the evening, either retail or restaurant and hospitality and, activity, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, Doylestown was really in the process of changing from, and it had been for a while, from a working town with 3 drugstores, a couple of grocery stores, Woolworths, and there was another store, Greens, across the street, which was sort of a Woolworths type place. Kenny's, the local news agency, you could get a lot of things in town. A hardware store. Slowly, those had all been closing, and by the early 90s, there were a lot of empty stores and not much to replace it. So the county came along at a time when there was a revitalization committee which had been formed to address that, and it was a perfect time for us to open. We were successful right from the beginning in 1993 and brought in over 70,000 people a year. And those people came out of the doors, after the show was over and said, hey, let's go get a drink, or can we have dinner? Or slowly and then quickly, a lot of restaurants opened. We used to be humble about not taking credit. Now we've taken total credit for Doylestown's revitalization. That's thanks to the county theater.
Well, whether you can take total credit or not, it certainly has been a tremendous catalyst in terms of change and change for the better in terms of our downtown community. So let's break down a little bit the county theater. First of all, there's the architecture.
Right.
The county, the organization of the county theater has provided tremendous effort to preserve and enhance that architecture. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Well, it was built again in 1938. It's a streamlined Art Deco style, which was a distinct sort of late period Art Deco architectural style. Amazing neon tower, great facade. The interior had the same sort of curved type lines. Everything we did was to try to maintain that, to restore it to that look and to maintain that look as we fixed it up and renovated it.
And historic organizations, including funding organizations in Harrisburg, have recognized the value of that and contributed to that.
Right.
As well.
We've got a couple of Keystone Grants from this Historical Museum Commission, and we're very thankful for that. That allowed us to redo the marquee, redo the neon tower.
And indeed, when people come to Doylestown, when they paint, when they photograph Doylestown, among the first places they photographed is that marquee.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's right. But then also, the county, besides the architecture, besides the hardscape of a building, the county is operated as a nonprofit.
Yes.
So that's very different from a commercial theater.
Yeah.
Can you describe that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, we did that as it came out of us being the Film Society, which was a 501c3 nonprofit. And the strategy of running a small downtown theater like the county, it became quickly apparent to me that the only way to make that work on a business level was as a nonprofit. You can make enough money to pay your staff and operate the business, but not enough to reinvest in the capital replace your projectors, replace the roof, do all those sorts of things. So that's as operating as a nonprofit allowed people to contribute to us to take care of that. And that's actually become, we were sort of on the vanguard of that as a trend across the country. There are a ton of theaters across the country that have been saved using that nonprofit model.
Right. The films that you show are somehow different. They're what people say they're films to talk about
Right.
after you leave the theater. How does that make a distinction for the county versus a theater that might be 5 miles away?
Well, the general description of what we are is an art house, and that we show art films. Now, we show more than just that. We show classic Hollywood films, we show independent films, we show films that are independent or alternatives. We'll also, show a mainstream film occasionally if it's interesting. But I think the distinction is that we're not driven strictly by a bottom line profit type motive. We're driven by, is this a good film? Is it a high quality film? Is it an artistically interesting film? That's our decision. We'd rather show one of those films and make less money than, show Spider-Man. But our bread and butter are art films.
And then I know from the mission of the county theater that there is an aspect of outreach in terms of the community.
Outreach is something that we've increasingly emphasized in terms of our future plans to work with, to be community driven, to be connected to local organizations, to have them come in and show films, to have them come in and use the facility, rather than us just saying, here are the films, come in. We want it to be, to a greater extent, a partnership with other organizations.
This is vastly different from your multiplex down the street in terms of what you accomplish here at the county theater, for sure.
And also just the ambience of coming in to our theater is like going to a fine restaurant rather than, a chain type situation. It's much calmer. People tend to be older, more interested in the movies. It's when you go to a Regal or an AMC, it's like a cacophony of noise and light, and it's like you're in Vegas, and like there are, people are talking in the theater, God forbid.
Well, and by the way, the popcorn's better here.
Yeah, well, that's true.
There's food too. So the county has actually led to your engagement with other theaters in the region.
Well, we were so successful in Doylestown, and Doylestown was such a hospitable place, and the borough employees and everyone was so supportive that we said, we've got to do this for other communities as well, if that opportunity ever comes up. So about 10 years into operating the county, the Ambler Theater in Ambler over in Montgomery County wasn't operating, and a group approached us, would you be willing to do the same thing that you did for the county for the Ambler? And we struggled with that decision, but then said, yeah, that's something we would like to do. And we formed a management company called Renew Theaters, Inc., which is also a 501c3 nonprofit. So we opened the Ambler. Since then, we've taken on the Highway Theater in Jenkintown and the Garden Theater over in Princeton.
Each has their own individual identity as well.
Each has their own individual identity. Each is a freestanding 501c3 nonprofit. Each has their local board. Each is locally oriented and directed. And I think most patrons and members don't even know that we run other theaters. It's such a local experience.
So we're in a new theater within the county theater, known as Theater One.
Right.
The pandemic created all sorts of challenges for all sorts of businesses and nonprofits in our community, and obviously far beyond. And here you and the county theater used that time to renovate the two existing theaters and build this new theater. Could you talk a little bit about that decision and about that experience?
Sure. We broke ground on construction in January of 2020. The plan was to keep the theater open, build the addition, close the theater briefly, connect them, and do all of that in 6 to 12 months. Then 2 months into the project, the COVID hit, our theater shut down, and we realized that doing it all at once made more sense. And in retrospect, I don't know how we would have done it by the original plan. It took us 18 months to do the whole project, which was, they always say it's twice as expensive and takes twice as long as what you planned, and that was true.
It's nothing like the 3 months you referred to in terms of one of the earlier theaters.
It boggles the mind. It boggles the mind that they did it that quickly.
Yeah.
But it turned out really well, and we're really excited with the results, and everyone seems really happy with it. And that comes out of a lot of planning. It took us 4 years from the point that we bought the neighboring property to when we did break ground, and that 4 years was spent doing all our due diligence and doing 20 public meetings, talking to our members, seeing exactly what they wanted, hiring an architect, hiring a fundraiser, having a lot of meetings with the borough, putting it all together. So what we did was the result of a lot of forethought and a lot of planning, and the result of a very transparent process, which probably took longer, but in the end, everybody likes what we've done.
And there are lots of ways to gauge public enthusiasm for the County Theater, and fundraising is one of those. Yeah. I mean, historically, the county has had a number of fundraisers during its 25 years, 25 years of existence, and they've been tremendously successful representing enthusiasm from the community. There are lots of ways to gauge leadership in the community, John, and I'd like to just close by saying that your leadership here at the County Theater, among all those who we can look to in terms of the leadership they provide in the county, in the borough, and beyond, is your leadership is significant and appreciated, and it's not just evidenced by the physical space that we're in, but also by the social environment that the County Theater provides. So thank you for that. Thank you for coming today, and it's been great chatting with you.
That's very nice of you to say, and I would just add that it has been a community effort. We've had a tremendous board of directors. I want to thank you. You have been on our board for many years and a former president of the board, and as you know, there are many people who have gone into making this possible. And we had over 3,000 people contribute to this expansion project to do this. So it's been very satisfying from my point of view. It's been a real labor of love, but I recognize that it is a community operation, and that makes it feel even more fulfilling because it connects us with so many people.
Well, you've also made board meetings actually enjoyable, because somewhere in that board meeting of the County Theater, there's a place for a conversation about films.
Right.
And that's always fun.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ron.
There were no stump the chumps, or at least if there were, you had good answers for them.
Fabulous.
Thank you.
Fabulous job.
Yeah, could we, I don't know if that would make the...
Well, yeah, I'm sure Tom can splice it in too.
Yeah.
We don't, we're not going to do the whole thing over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a good dry run. Now let's do
Yeah, right.
Strand Theater wishes to take this opportunity to thank all of you hometown folk for your patronage in the past and to assure you of excellent entertainment for the future.